All right.
All right.
Autumn Night.
Yeah.
I'm Pablo de Ocampo, director and curator of Moving Image here at Walker Art Center, as you know. Autumn Night, artist extraordinaire, here in the culmination of a many years lead up to a new performance, Autumn Night live at the Walker 2025. Thanks for sitting with me.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to go back to when we met as a way to maybe chart through some thoughts and ideas and pose some questions about what you do and how we got to this project that you are premiering this weekend. So we met 6 years ago. You were doing a performance at Human Resources in Los Angeles, and I had no idea who you were. I called a friend who lived in LA to meet up, and they said, oh, well, we're going to this performance at Human Resources, Autumn Night. Do you want to meet us there? We'll go get dinner afterwards. And I was like, yeah, sounds great. So later that day, I'm with another friend having lunch, and they're like, oh, what are you doing later? And I said, oh, I'm going to this performance at Human Resources. And they say, oh, well, what is that performance? And I'm like, Autumn Night. And they're like, is that a name or is that a title? And I'm like, I don't know. They're like, do you know anything about it? I was like, not really. I'm just trying to make plans with a friend, and they told me to come see this, and I'll go see a performance. Like, I'm down for whatever. That performance is called Yes.
Yes and No, Occult.
Okay. So I think when I saw that performance, I mean, one, I love the exhilarating experience of seeing something that one knows nothing about. In the sort of modern age, it's like, I feel like we know everything about everything. And it's so absolutely like unbelievable to walk into a room and sit down on a cold concrete floor in the middle of winter in Los Angeles and be like, I have no idea what's about to happen. And what I recall of that, I'm trying to form this into a question, what I recall of being so utterly just completely transfixed with you and your practice and your presence as a performer at that time was something that this friend of mine that brought me to the performance kind of characterized as like this gentle insistence at getting the audience to sort of do your bidding. So it was this audience participation and audience engagement that wasn't so much, I mean, it was kind of telling people what to do, but it was a very friendly, insistence that they do the thing that you're telling them to do. And I was just utterly like blown away by the skill with which you navigated that. And that performance is very different than what you're doing at the Walker. But as a starting point, I wanted you to talk a little bit about that piece specifically and what it was and how the frame of that was developed.
That was the first time that I'd really performed that whole idea. It came from a friend of mine invited me to do a little performance, and I didn't have anything set up, and I came up with this list of things I would have the audience to do like while she was talking, and I had like 15, 20 minutes. And so I did try it out in Houston, a smaller version. And when Jennifer Doyle invited me to come to LA and Human Resources, I was like, okay, let's flesh this idea out. Like, what if we made this like an evening length thing? Because the concept was like an interest, came from an interest in cults. I think that documentary Wild Wild Country.
Oh, right. It was around that time period.
Yeah. It was right around, and I was obsessed. And I was talking about it with everybody. And I really wanted to think about, what are the mechanisms, to develop a cult, like how to quickly develop a cult in in an hour. Like, what are the things you kind of need to do? And also wanted to think about like doing a performance where I didn't have to speak spontaneously or improvisationally, and really kind of scale back my words and kind of like test my skills as a performer. So that's really the context for that performance you saw in LA. Yeah.
It's amazing because what I remember is there are moments of it where that forming the cult felt really great. You'd get a bunch of people to do something, and then there was this like collective satisfaction of, these are all these like, you're doing these little weird gestures. That first one, I think you just like, you stood there in the center of the room and were like, uh-huh. And you just kept saying that until everybody repeated after you. And then, you kind of made the rules, right? Mm-hmm. None of us knew the rules, but you made the rules as we go along. You did that other one where you were like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or something like that until people would get them. But then there were other moments where that sort of like inviting people into it, all of a sudden people would feel, at one point you asked for gifts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And somebody like threw $20 into a thing, and there was a moment later on where it was like, wait, that you see that person realize like, wait, I might not get my $20 back. What just happened? Wait, there goes my thing. I want that thing back. Mm-hmm. Which I don't remember exactly what happened with it, but I loved the feeling of both of those things. So when I met you and saw this performance, like what I understood you to be the master of, so like know nothing about you, but I'm like, okay, Autumn Night is the master of like how to navigate and manage and orchestrate social relationships. I assume that to be who you are and how you work. And we talk a little bit towards working on a project at some point. And this is 2019 leading into 2020. So obviously what we had started to talk about and think about did not come to fruition for many reasons that we can all sort of imagine around the spring of 2020. We ended up working on a project at that time to kind of pivot away from the original plans, which was a live streamed video performance. Came out of two of the opportunities that you're sort of like faced with having to reconfigure in the pandemic era. So one with the kitchen, a residency there, and then something that was going to be a performance and some other things at the Western Front in Vancouver. You have done a lot of work with video, but this pivot was like a very different way of handling video. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about sort of the opportunity of like, oh, let's do something let's keep the paychecks flowing through I mean, that was, I think, literally our conversation. I was like, should we just cancel this, or do you want to like mess around on Zoom and I'll give you some money? And you were like, that one.
Yeah, like, let's keep going.
Yeah, so there's an opportunity there, but can you talk a little bit about what in your practice, how you were thinking about those limited opportunities as they came up in 2020, working with video in a very different way than you had in the past?
Well, the opportunity at the kitchen, where we made these durational live stream video performances, of course, because everybody's at home, so they can be 3 hours because no one needs to go home.
You're just making your sourdough bread.
Yeah, just
brewing some kombucha,
pretending to read a book. And the Autumn Night kitchen thing is just on in the background for hours, and maybe you look over at it. But it really sort of taught me that I can sort of have a relationship with video as a performer. Like, I never really made performance for video before that. It just kind of felt awkward, and I was, like you said, the social interaction, I guess, skill set, I really had worked on getting, good at that. But I knew that this opportunity with the Western Front and doing something online, I was like, okay, I do know how to do that. I do know how to have a relationship with the camera as a performer and an environment. So I was like, I can do it. The difference is we didn't have, 5 stories, 5 floors of kitchen. Mm-hmm. We had a studio in the Bronx.
Yeah.
So
a small studio.
A small studio in the Bronx. But it could fit, 3-4 camera people and sound designer and a video director. But we really tried to think about, bringing the world of the kitchen and all those different surfaces and textures and ideas. Like, how do you bring it to a really small, tight space? And that was the opportunity and the challenge of the project at the Western Front, right? Like, how do you put a world kind of underneath a camera lens as opposed to having camera crews follow you around an entire building?
Yeah. Had you worked with objects in that way so specifically?
No.
As a part of your performance practice?
No.
Because if, like, in my head, and this is somewhat recent realizations as we've stewarded this project through for the Walker more, I'm thinking about the relationship between objects, people, and environments, and the way that you orchestrate and move through those. Do you see a relationship between those?
I mean, absolutely. I think in the ways that you sort of talk to people, you take a thing that they say and you turn it and flip it, and then you respond to that. I think I have, through these projects, developed a relationship to objects in that way.
Yeah, like you're in the kitchen, you see a desk, you're like, okay, I can go do, what can I do with that desk?
Yeah.
Or you've got the table in the studio, or the table that we worked on here for the walker. Okay, there's the milk frother. What am I going to do with the milk frother? Right. There's the flame face mask. What do I do with the flame face mask? Really
trying to find the endless opportunities, like in static objects. I mean, because obviously people have history, so there's a million things you can get out of a person.
In some of your previous video works, you've got a really well-known work called Sanity TV, which obviously is TV based in its reference, but the relationship to the person is more direct in that. You're kind of coordinating that more as like a live performance, has TVs in it, but there's an audience. Live studio audience is kind of like what you're working with there as the material. I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that disconnect between yourself as a performer and the audience, which was enforced by those pandemic-related projects, but we're now carrying forward to a certain degree in this Walker performance. As someone who, again, feels like you really come from relationships and coordinating entanglements and encounters.
Right. I think during that pandemic period, I really had to think about having a relationship with myself and my own mind. Really, kind of really getting in touch with what interests me internally, really, and bouncing off of that, really amusing the self. I mean, it's really, you had to go back to, when you were a kid and you had to go play by yourself in a corner and really, really, amuse yourself. And some people it's very easy to do, and some people you kind of got to get back in the habit of doing that.
Yeah. We started talking shortly, a year and a half into the pandemic about this Walker project. And so at that point, you had done a couple of these streaming video things. And my recollection of the one that we worked on together via Western Front is that we kind of walked away from that being like, oh, whoa, that was good.
Yeah.
I thought we were just killing time on the internet. But wait, something actually hit there and it struck. And so you did these two projects in 2020 and early 2021, streaming online. As 2021, we were working through that year, and it was like, okay, we see an end to this where we might be back doing things in the world. What did you think was going to happen with that? Knowing that you came out of that Western Front piece and the kitchen piece both being like, oh, there's something there. Did you have an idea of what to do with that other than to try to do it again?
It really was about trying to do it again. Because I think that you were surprised, I was surprised, and I thought, wow, when I look back, I was like, oh, wow, that was actually really kind of beautiful. It was definitely fun to create. Yeah. It was like you're trying to have fun, but I was like, oh, actually, no, the product was actually really nice, and actually people actually responded very positively. Yeah. To the experience of having watched that, having caught it in real time, and later having access to it to watch again and again. Yeah. And I thought, oh, I want to do that.
Yeah. How do you differentiate between the thing that's like, I want to do that again, and that thing may be something totally different, versus works of yours? Because I do think that you have some pieces like the Sanity TV maybe being one that are a bit more concretely sort of named and identified as like a piece. Like, oh, I'm going to go show this piece again. The difference between showing a piece again and I'm going to do that again, do that idea again.
You know what? I think maybe by the time this one is done, this will seem like, oh, that work that you do that is like that does that thing. And I think the name for it, I don't, there's something about it because it straddles performance and cinema and a couple other things. It there's animation in it. It doesn't have like a specific genre. So I think it's kind of hard to sort of nail down, like, okay, this is the thing that I will do that has a particular practice around it, because I do a lot of performance as well. So making moving image is a part of my practice, but it's not like my main practice.
Yeah.
And if it was, then I would put all of my energy into only doing this. And I want to put more energy towards doing this. It takes a lot of resources.
Yeah.
To make this. In a way that I think, Sanity TV, it was easier to do it over and over again because it's myself in a room with a mic, which was part of the strategy of creating that performance.
Yeah.
But this one has to have more care. The rollout is a bit more grand. It has a specific sort of place once it's out there.
Yeah. So the frame of, or the starting point, I guess, of this performance for the Walker came from those projects, and it kind of came from, maybe the proposition of like, you've done these things under the auspices of necessity, that you can't be out in the world doing real performances. But what happens if those necessities are out, and the sort of the play between liveness, being mediated through the moving image, isn't required by a pandemic lockdown. Where can you talk a little bit? Like, do you recall much of like what is the early sort of stages of like when we first started thinking through what this would be, and like where you were responding to from the constrictions of live streaming via a web link on a website versus being able to think about streaming or live making a performance without those constrictions?
I mean, I think just the offering or the invitation of the cinema here at the Walker. I mean, just seeing the space, right? It's a proper cinema, because the projects already had a cinematic quality, right? Even on people's laptops or their TV screens when they would stream it, they would tell me, it just looks so cinematic.
Yeah.
And so the invitation to actually potentially show it in a proper cinema.
Yeah.
I thought, well, this is where actually it is supposed to live.
Yeah.
It is supposed to be. Now, I will say that the live streaming did open up this work and my work to a much, much larger audience.
A lot of people saw the work.
A lot of people saw the work.
In ways that don't often happen with performance art.
Yes, absolutely. And absolutely. People saw the work and share the work. I definitely have people tell me all the time, I show this to my classes. Yeah. People say that all the time. But I think the experience here of people seeing it live in a seat with each other, it is, even though it's in a cinema, it is a traditional performance experience.
Yeah.
Where you're experiencing a thing with a group of people. You're laughing together, you're curious together, you're confused together.
Yeah.
So it kind of brings it back to the original form.
Yeah. One thing that I have been thinking a lot about these last couple of weeks as we've been testing and working through things is, I kind of keep coming back a little bit to some of those gestures you were doing in that human resources performance.
And can I say the cult obviously worked?
I guess so.
6 years later,
here I am.
You remember?
I'm like, Autumn, I'll go anywhere that Autumn goes. Mission accomplished. Indeed. But I was thinking about, I was thinking a lot about scale, I guess, with this piece. And so kind of leaping off of what you were saying with like being in a big proper cinema and seeing this, we're in the cinema right now where audiences have been watching this. And it's a giant, I can't really tell you how big this screen is, but it's a big movie theater screen. Looks big, sounds big, colors are big, everything's really big. And I've been thinking about like this like contrasting scales that like, we are showing this performance very big, but the performance is comprised of these things that are very, very small, and that are, thinking of like more of a theater context. I'm someone who grew up in children's theater. We've talked about this. You sort of learn theater as something where you're having to kind of like exaggerate and make everything bigger because you know that you're this small person on this stage in this really big room, and if anything's going to register, you have to amplify those things. And there's this really interesting back and forth with scale here, where you are doing things that in a live performance context wouldn't register at all, but then do register through the sort of apparatus of looking at it through the cinema. But then those little things are like made quite big. Some of those are visual, some of those are sound. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that scale as a performer.
I think it's, as a person who grew up trained in theater, you know, you're trained to kind of do all of this sort of internal work, this sort of, you know, really tiny, nuanced and internal work to get the textures of the moment, to inhabit the text, to get the emotion just right. So but again, like you said, but you have to project it really large so people, you know, can see, or like at a proper scale, appropriate scale. But I think here it's such a beautiful experience to actually employ all of that sort of like emotion or sort of thought process projected onto or handling an object, and to know that there are several people that can capture that, are actually looking to capture it, and have to be attuned in an improvisational way. Like it's not like a film where it's like, okay, we're doing this scene where, you know, Autumn, the character has the cup and the cup to the lips and capture the eyes, you know, as she's thinking. I'm having an improvisational process, but I'm also improvising emotion and thoughts. And having those captured and read. Somehow, I don't even know what is being captured, but I know that I can just cycle through as many as I want to, and that's what they're looking for. That's the meat of what they're feeding back in, that processing. So it's great to not have to make it bigger or smaller. I can just
do what feels right.
I can just do what feels right.
Do you have text in your head when you're performing?
Wow.
Something like this?
That's a good question.
I mean, I know you do to some degree in like the Mother or M blank blank performance. There's kind of like, there's like a log line maybe.
Yes, definitely. Well, yeah, and that performance is, you've failed me. You're bad children.
But do you have a text in a performance like this?
Not really. Not really. There is a sort of blankness that I really try to maintain as an exercise. Like, keep the mind blank, keep the mind blank. I think there are some things that pop up, like at the end of yesterday's performance, I used a label maker to print out these texts, and the texts were of people in my life who passed away in the last few years. But I didn't have that text in my head.
That wasn't driving the gesture.
It wasn't driving the gesture. I think when I kind of sat down and had a solid moment. I did have that image in my head maybe earlier in the day, but it didn't come back until almost 2 hours in. I was like, okay, write that and put it out there. You don't ever have to speak it because there is no text. I mean, that's the joy of this performance for me, not speaking.
Yeah.
Really. So not speaking or not having any text in my head, which really allows me to play, because all of these objects have so much context that if I even thought too long about the context, I think I would lose a sense of play or stream of consciousness.
I mean, I guess what I was trying to wonder is, I was trying to think about your background in theater a little bit. I was trying to think about like what differentiates theater from performance art or from dance or any of these things. And, you know, one of those markers for me is always thinking about like the text, that you're sort of like, whether or not you're speaking the text or performing out of the text. So, yeah, that's interesting to hear about the absence of the text.
Yeah, to be free from it.
Yeah. To
be released from it. I'm like, okay, the text is that clock. I got to get to the end of the time.
It's got to say 9:30.
It's got to, and literally last night I was very clearly counting down. I mean, that's the most verbal I was in the whole 2 hours.
Yeah.
The
last 11 minutes.
The last 11 minutes, like a very clear countdown to let you know that this work, even though it's improvised, the container is time.
Has time been a container throughout your performances, or is that something that has come up more recently?
I would say in the last few years, because the improvisation just going a million different places, I thought, oh, there's so many people, and if I get started on something or even create a story in the room about a person being a bear, like we could go on and create a world. There has to be something to rein this in, and it's time. It's time. But that comes from my work with group dynamics, group relations work, where you're exploring this stuff in the moment. There's no end to it because you're studying the here and now. But as the consultant in the room, your job is to say, even if a person's mid-sentence, we're at a time boundary.
Yeah. Be like, we're going to do this for 60 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're doing this for 60 minutes, and that's it. And I don't care if you're having a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, it's interesting I've been very aware of time this week, and as you've been prepping through this, and as I've been sitting in the cinema watching these, watching your rehearsals and watching prep through the performance, and thinking about how there's a whole element to your work that relates to histories of experimental film and structural film that I don't even know if they're things that you're thinking about, but I'm thinking about it because I'm sitting in a theater where I've sat here and watched Michael Snow films, and I think about like time as the container for the way certain filmmakers work, right? You sort of have like a reel of 16 millimeter film lasts 10 minutes. So the shot's 10 minutes. I'm just going to shoot the whole reel of film. That's how long the shot is. That's been really like super enriching for me. And I'm asking that to sort of ask if you have ways that you are thinking about the moving image, like are there like historical references or influences that have come into your way of thinking about moving image? Or do you feel like you are sitting in this body of work that will maybe now be known as Autumn Night Live at XXX in whatever year, time and place, as really just sort of existing on its own terms in its own space?
Seeing a bit of the rehearsals, the playback, and watching it, I was thinking, this probably does sit in conversation with a bunch of artists who have tried this, right? Tried versions of this. Maybe not live in this way, shown like this. So I was like, it will be by scholars such as yourself, film scholars, will be placed in conversation appropriately when the time comes. And I do hope that it is in conversation with films or, video work, cinema, moving image made by artists, right? And maybe on the way to something else, maybe even further experimental or further narratively, but I don't think it will. I hope it's not just, Autumn Night Live at the Walker. I hope it really, has its place in, moving image. Because watching it, I'm like, oh no, this is something specific. This deserves to be in conversation with other types of work, either the content, the context, the form.
Other observation this week has been getting to see you work with collaborators, because our one time working together in the past was all via Zoom and remote. So we were actually working with these same collaborators, but I didn't know who any of them were. I hadn't met any of them. And they're all back here for this project, got the band back together again. Have you had like long relationships with collaborators in that way before? Because you've worked with the folks that work on this project for, a few years now.
Not really.
Yeah.
Not in this way in terms of that kind of collaborator that works with in a very technical way.
Yeah.
I haven't had that long-term collaboration that way. So this is the first.
So I've totally loved seeing the sort of like negotiation of everybody on the team. So, behind the scenes, as it were, is a technical director, 3 different camera people, and a sound technician. You're also working with an animator, kind of off-site in advance of the thing. But I've really loved seeing how you guys are like thinking and responding to one another together in the way that it's sometimes it's clear that you're sort of leading this performance, but there are also a lot of parts of it where it's kind of unclear who's pointing in which direction and who's following. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that collaborative relationship, and if there are sort of any, just talk about it in the long view, but also in the process over the last week here at the Walker.
I started working with them, this group of people at the kitchen. I was actually introduced to them through the kitchen.
Yeah.
And, I was like, I'd never really done performance or video, so I was like, okay, well, let's do it, But when I watched it back, and even when I watched back the Western Front project, I thought, okay, these people are really, they've got their own way of storytelling that is really beautiful, that is really satisfying, and that I can trust that they're making something beautiful around me, and meaningful and thoughtful around me. And we don't have very many conversations about what the narrative actually is, but it's really, I just respect their eye so much, and their choices so much, and we're not talking about it ahead of time.
Yeah.
So being here, getting the band back together again with a larger, stage, and obviously, showing it in the cinema, which is what their training is for, what their cameras are actually for.
Yeah.
It's really been important to kind of, as a group, step it up in terms of, let's make some more decisions. Like, let's actually be a little bit more specific, but like, let's still have the magic that we had before. Let's still have the process we had before.
Yeah.
But let's make sure that we do everything in our power to set the shot up right, meaning shot like the whole thing up. So that's what the process has been about this week, and giving notes and testing and trying. And I'm like, yeah, we still got it. We still have this relationship.
Yeah, you all seem to really get each other in a way. It's sort of like the very natural, and again, on the outside observation, you aren't like all talking like this is going to happen and that's going to happen and this is going to happen. It all just sort of seems to like kind of unfold in a very natural way. And I think that's why we keep using that like getting the band back together reference, that it does feel quite musical in that way of like an ensemble that can like everybody picks up the tool that they know how to use, and you all figure out how to kind of like work with one another in that arrangement.
Right. I think it's respecting everybody's expertise.
Yeah.
Right. What the live editing is doing, that's a specific skill, which is different from being behind the camera, which is different from being in front of the camera.
Yeah.
Like everybody kind of, and the sound design, everybody kind of has their lane.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like Ross is the drummer. You're not going to go try to play drums. That's his job.
No one is switching in between these roles.
Which is an interesting, actually, metaphor, because he is a real drummer.
He is a drummer.
But he is also, in the context of the performance, the person who is keeping the time.
Oh, no, absolutely. And honestly, when I didn't
even put that together until just now.
When I'm watching it, and when I watch it back, or even this week when watching some of the tidbits, I was like, oh, yeah, the way that the images kind of hopped around and hopped back and boom, 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 boom. I was like, right, this person is a professor of percussion. Of course, the rhythm of it is going to be amazing and show up. And that's what we're feeling in the audience.
Autumn, it's been a pleasure to talk.
It's
been a pleasure to work.
Okay, good.
I'm so happy to know you.
I'm
so
happy
happy
to
I
know
got
you too.
invited to that human resources performance 6 years ago.
Randomly. I'm really glad too, because I didn't really know people in LA, so I'm glad that this was...
That a person not from LA showed up.
Exactly. So I'm really happy about that encounter.
Well, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.